Welcome everyone to WriterSpeak, dedicated to the written word and those who produce it. I am your host, Jeane Slone. I have written 3 historical novels. The latest title is She Was an American Spy During World War II. Today in the studio, I would like to welcome Tosca Lenci. Welcome, Tosca.
Thank you, Jeannie. It's an absolute pleasure to be here again, having been fortunate to have met with you once before.
Yes, this is a second interview.
Yes.
Because you're such a prolific writer. We have 3 additional books to talk about.
Yes, we do.
And I was really exploring your wonderful website. You had a good designer.
Yes, Kathy Anistad. Yes, she has been a treasure for me.
I can tell because it's wonderful.
It's beautiful.
And I want to read the best part on the website, which you wrote. Okay.
But I said to Kathy, when I asked when we were working on it, I said, I sent it to her, but I said, I don't think you really ought to use it. But she put it up there, but in little print. Yeah.
You know
I think I know what you're going to read.
And this is what Tosca wrote. Mind, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the mothership Tosca. Her ongoing mission to investigate consciousness, to explore old meanings of civilization, and go boldly where thought has gone before.
Yes, I did write that.
I like that.
I love that program.
I could tell.
Yes,
It was
yes.
cute.
Well, I love the one that was done for my, I won't say generation, but for my decade, which, was a certain group of people for those characters. And it was they're all good, of course, but for my generation, I guess that was the one that was most enticing.
Well, I thought it was very clever to put on there.
Well, thank you. You can thank Kathy.
Yes, thank you, Kathy. Tosca, you are such a prolific writer. There are quite a few people who write and don't even finish what they're writing, and I really admire that. I was curious, since we have a lot of authors viewing our show, do you have a particular routine of writing that you do every day, or do you write at a particular time during the day?
No. Routine is too strict a word, or not. It doesn't capture the way that I've had to write. Has been dictated by the rest of life. And early on, because of circumstances, the fact that I was given to write, as writers who are born to write and want to write are, I was given to do that early on and know and want to do that, but it was arrested dramatically for some 25 years, more or less. Once in a while, well, I used my writing then in my employment jobs, but always with words of other people. But anyway, so when I wrote, and as time went on and finally I retired or got close to that, or the children were grown, then I would write in spurts whenever a thought might occur to me and it might coincide with circumstances where I could take that time. There was paper and a pencil nearby and I would write. And I began collecting those notes, and then the time increased, and I always seemed to write from whatever my thought processes were at the time. If you're considering, for example, the subject that you just recently finished a book about, here is, you're in that book, are going to be the thoughts of that woman. And in effect, they're going to be your thoughts, which you have put into that woman. But what I might write my thoughts, which I would do, journal, we could say journaling.
Journaling,
okay?
yeah.
So I would be writing these things out, you know, my feelings, what was going on, whatever, and then introducing it with other objective thought. And eventually I had time to transcribe them.
Mm-hmm.
And then as I transcribed them, they were of different kinds, and I began to put them into folders. I think my clerical training and long employment history, to say nothing of shorthand, were extremely valuable to me.
Yeah.
I couldn't have done it because we all get down to time. And the creation time, you really need to be free. And, you know, enough writers have gone crazy because they didn't have enough freedom to complete the work.
Well, it sounds like the folder system and shorthand probably has really helped you produce as much as you have.
And file organization, one of my earliest jobs, I was a new mother at the time, was with a State Department, a large State Department, which all of a sudden was overdone with paper and files. It had so many divisions. And Remington Rand came in, a company, I don't even know if it still exists, and they sent a woman in, and I was assigned to help her, and she took all of this huge buildings, files, central files was, you know, inundated, and organized it, and it was such a wonderful model. Well, it's actually what they use on the internet, because, you know, you start with one generic subject and then you go subdivide. There it was Department of Fisheries, then you had stream improvement, fishing closures, public relations, you know, it was a huge department. So
Sounds like wonderful training.
So the training was
Yeah.
absolutely, totally conducive to being able, but I suppose that's true of, you know, I believe we're all born with art in us, and it might be a mechanical one or a literary one, whatever it is. You know, the time, the freedom to then use that art for not earning your living, but creating is a totally different
You know,
thing.
speaking of art, the covers on your books are just beautiful.
Thank you. I love them too.
The design is so original and the colors are so vivid. What type of art training did you have? I don't think you actually had.
No, I didn't.
And I'm astonished by that. And, you know, especially you look at this cover and then show this cover is a beautiful painting.
This is my present. This is the last garden I ever will be able to create. You know how we are, those that love our homes and our little plots of ground. And
Do you have an actual painting of that cover?
Yeah, I did.
Oh.
This is a photograph. Everything's a photograph of a painting, pretty much.
Well, I'm amazed what a wonderful self-taught artist you are, because I never got
Well, I
beyond
didn't do the titles, you know, and the fonts and
No,
everything.
I'm just talking about the colors and paintings. They show a lot of talent, and I never got past the stick figures, and I think you've gone beyond.
Well, I love to draw, and that was one of the things that I could do as a child. When you think of possessions that a child can distract or indulge in, you know, with my grandson, it's anything and everything digital.
Yeah. Well, that childhood of drawing came in handy later on, I guess.
Yes, it did. Well, it was a pastime, you know. It was a pastime.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about your first book that we have displayed here, A Child's Book of Light. And it was the result of perception and physics, a physics endeavor.
It was initially perception, another long story, but I became gradually and consistently interested in the subject of sightedness, how we see, and light, of course, and because of some childhood experiences with light that drew my attention to it more than I think generally would have. Most, if I had lived in those circumstances. So anyway, that was it. And I started to make observations of how I received the visual field. And I began to see the ways it seemed that the field, the divided field, enters each eye. And I studied some of the, I'm not authority on all of this, but I was really interested, and I studied some, the current theory, or what's been the prevailing theory of how the images of the two eyes eventually unite into one in the visual cortex. So I got into all of that.
Yeah, I can see that,
and,
the science of it.
But in order for, I don't do well with formulas, and whereas there are the minds that can look at a formula and instantly attach to each symbol that which it represents is something very difficult for me. It's a memory thing. So I have to have something I can envision. So I needed to envision something that carried images to the eye. There were some observations that were really interesting, for example, to learn, to envision that everything that's coming to your eyes, I mean, you could cut the earth in half and lie down on the center of its flat and look out into the universe, or that part of the universe, and almost half of it is being funneled literally into 2/5 of an inch, which is the size of your pupil. So anyway, I had to have a model, and that got me into physics, because then once you know that in the physical world, scientists have identified 4 fundamental forces, and the ultimate thing has been in recent physics science to unite the 4 forces, but gravity doesn't seem to want to make its way into it, because they're looking for another particle, the theory being that everything's reducible to quarks. So anyway, I need to do a model, and that's what I ultimately did. And there's a very short essay, but it's an assembly. Okay, the physics part simply is, how to write it down. The physics part simply summarizes what I assembled from studying the subject. I was deliberating a model that would serve to envision conveyance of the images of a visual field, or what's called a horopter, which is the plane of focus your eyes are attached to by the force in between. And that's what I was trying to envision. And so I had to come upon a way of seeing that ultimate medium. And so the physics is all about that assembly. The perception part then goes on to describe some potential difference in the way that images are received and collected to the brain. But it satisfied me, and at the end of that are some little observations that one can make if one's interested in noting in following the theory. And so that's what this is all about, and I'm sorry it took me so long to describe it.
Well, it's in a way, it is complex.
It has a glossary, which was just updated in July, that gives the definitions as best I could get them of the terms or to put them, and of recent developments, like the Higgs boson could probably be updated. That's the particle that now has been said to have been the experience of manifested at the Large Hadron Collider, I think, but has yet to be corroborated, whereas, would be considered the gravity particle. So the glossary's been updated to a certain point, and the last thing on that subject I would like to say, the science subject, is how, as one studies these things, even in just a minor depth, one realizes how much has gone before all of these so-called, some are facts, some are theories, upon which we keep building and exploring with our consciousness that in which we exist. And Isaac Asimov, who some might remember, I was lucky to come and have across and have a compendium he did of science, like from the very beginning, just this side of mythology. And just looking up, there's a blurb on each one, just looking up what led to what led to what led to what led. You realize that all of these lives and work and thoughts of humankind that give us these advances, yes, we see them, funneled through one person, Einstein being, in science, a very good example, but he himself would acknowledge what went before. And I just, just recently saw a documentary about a man named Langley and a man named Brashear, early astrophysicists, we're talking 1800s, and how they, in their work, ultimately, with Brashear, I think it was Langley, built actually the first, what he called the aerodrome, and his work preceded the work of the Wright brothers, but only by like 10 years. So science is endless, and that's the end of it for me. I'm sorry.
So are you going to read a part in this one? Or
I don't know if it's necessary. Let me see what I clip, because
well, maybe we should move on to the next book. You can
the kind of language is, the kind of assembly it is of all these definitions assembled in sentences best, Okay, this is the first sentence, the physics, part one. Quantum or wave mechanics, that is, quantum field theory, known as QFT, postulates the four identified force fields as, quote, quanticized on all points. In theory calculations, wave equations represent excitation of points, that is, vibrations, oscillations, correspondent with quantum particles. Okay, that's the first sentence. So you see, it's just, and then there's a glossary. So that's an example of what the essay says. Then
I think that you explained to us what the book is about, and would be good for our audience to know that they can go to your website and read it. So why don't we move on to the next book that you can explain?
And to do that, I should read the last paragraph of this essay, which is, the purpose of all the foregoing was not to answer whether all masses are imperceptibly submicroscopically geometrically cogent spheres, but to devise a structure upon which to stretch perception. One sees great detail looking across a room full of objects or across fields to hills. And that's, I've already discussed, so we don't need any more of that.
Wonderful. So let's talk about dreaming unified fields. And Dreaming Unified Fields is a combination of memoir and dreams related to your various writings.
Yes, I, like everyone, was interested in dreams, and coincidentally, and I don't know if it had any effect on it, I had started yoga, not intense yoga, a practice of yoga, studying a couple of certain sources of yoga, and doing a few, positions, and studying their instructions on how to meditation or a state of total sort of relaxation. And in the process, I began to have some very unusual dreamings. Now, I'd always been interested in dreamings, but I seemed to dream a lot and more often. And occasionally, and this was when I was at the height of trying to digest all this physics stuff in order that I could write what I wanted to write. And I would have these dreams that I'd be hung up on something, and all of a sudden I'd have a dream that would somehow move me. And so I got very interested. There's a little essay about dreaming and different theories and things that precedes the actual dreams. Some relate to the trilogy that we discussed the first time, and this is just a sample, relates to one that relates to no, it does. It relates to the history. I thought I had one that I clipped that related to the science part. Yes, here it is. It was August 3rd of 1983. I had been on the verge for 3 days, giving up attempting to complete a drawing showing a misconception of perception. 3 nights I worked on it, but kept coming up against the same obstacle. In order for the theory to serve as law, something I did not know had to be true about anatomy of the eye. At the last possible moment, a telephone call came from a professor for whom I timidly had left a message some days before. Now, this I'm describing what's called the dream day. That is the day preceding the dream. The missing link provided. Nowhere in the literature had I come across it. Quote, the greater portion of macular fibers leading from the retina into the optic nerve sheaths enter at the temporal side of the head of the optic nerve. A small difference, but all required to allow for complete overlapping of binocular fusion under the new theory. I went to bed. I slept and I dreamt. I awakened in the dream to find my eyes sealed shut. Try as I might, I couldn't get them open. I arose, went into the bathroom, toward the mirror, and my eyes opened. The room was pitch black. In the mirror, all I could see were my open eyes with attention fixed on the right one. In it, I could see a brightly shining light, as if somewhere far back behind the pupil. Before I could ponder on this reflection of a light when there was none, my eyes sealed again. I made my way blindly to the kitchen, turned on the tap, and sprinkled water on my eyes, trying to wedge them open. I was beginning to consider that I might never get them open again, when in fact I did awake. Lying there, I received the following recollections. The light from the right eye was off a square within. That led me off into some of the geometry. But this one has to do with another dream. It's the only other one I'll read. This was February 6th of 2008. The past week, I had continued more studying theoretical physics, being totally uncredentialed for such pursuit, as you know. That apparent ludicrousness of fact I struggled with moment to moment. Yesterday, organizing review of research against early simple child book of light drafts to see whether anything was worth setting forth, I was brain deep in notes on neutron bombardment, and I had reached a point of thinking again, this is stupidly impossible. Now, if I record coincidence, it isn't that I think of them of interest to anyone but myself, only to rid mind of them so that it can be used for knowable causes And this dreaming one has reoccurred enough in just the following way to be a nuisance. In the dream, I was speaking by telephone with a man, it being difficult to understand what he was saying. At first I thought he might be Middle Eastern, except that didn't seem to fit. I asked his name, which he told to me, but it was so difficult to hear. I tried to repeat it, hear clearly, thinking then that it might be Hispanic, but the sound simply wouldn't come to me. The first syllable seemed to be a soft sa, but when I said it, he interrupted me that was wrong, and again said his name again. And then I awoke. I tried to say what I thought I almost had heard, sour, sangre, sare. Then the thought came that perhaps I could check the table of contents of my physics anthology, and almost as if by plan, the first name to arrest me was Segre, Emilio Segre, an Italian physicist who initiated work on neutron bombardments. Now, you got to say that's weird. That's weird, right?
Yeah.
I got frightened. I believe one can take, yoga is a science, and I was lucky to have had the book of a doctor named Ramurti Mishra, but you have to be really careful because one does not want to push the mind too far, whether it's by meditation, in trances, whether they're induced psychologically, if one, or substantially, that is with some, substance. We're just, our brains are there, our synapses and everything, I think, are just there to capture a certain type of energetic communication. And I think if you exceed that, you can get into trouble, if not kill yourself. So,
well, that was very fascinating.
So that's what Dreaming Unifying Fields is all about.
Yeah. Well, let's hear about Genesis 3, and that's a great title.
Genesis
I
3.
read quite a bit of Genesis 3.
Did you like it?
Yeah, it was very engrossing.
It's a good plot. That was, any writing, for a writer to say writing is fun.
It takes you into another world.
Yeah.
And you were inventing
it is when
another
you're doing
world.
fiction, right?
Yeah, you were inventing another world.
Yeah.
And that's kind of fun to do, is inventing another world.
Or totally recapturing an old one in all in that collected consciousness of the era, like your books, the first two.
Mm-hmm.
So this one is called, again, The Woman Who Was a Spy.
Oh, and yes, I wrote a book about American women spies.
It's coincidental, if not synchronistic, that Genesis 3 is the third book in this trilogy, and the third book in the other one was Delilah, which is also about a feminine spy.
Uh-huh.
Right. So, but this is about four persons, who find themselves through pretty dramatic circumstances, isolated, where they don't know precisely how they got there wholly, still in body and mind, they don't know. And all that they can ascertain once they come to is that they're in a high mountain valley, ringed by mountains, and there is what essentially is like a homestead, one there on the property that when they come to and realize that they're there, the four of them, and go to this place together, they find stocked with just about everything that's needed for not just survival, but for a continuation of existence, seeds and books and fuel and so forth. And so they've come from four very different arenas. One of them, and they all cease to exist in those arenas at the same instant, and all found themselves in this new shared consciousness together. There are a middle-aged woman, a middle-aged man, a young boy, barely, still in his teens really, and a little girl. And the event happens under different circumstances in each of their localities. Do you want me to go on?
Well, we wanted just a little synopsis because I know that the audience will want to go to your website to read it.
Well,
the
middle-aged woman is in Washington, D.C. It's on the eve of the decision whether there is going to be human survival or not, essentially whether the two remaining world powers are going to unleash atomic weapons, or whether the nation in which she now exists decides it is going to do so. And meanwhile, all of the globe essentially is waiting for announcement, and in the United States, the television is just carrying the same signal, which is waiting for the president's message. Meanwhile, this woman is at the head of all of the throngs that have come to the Capitol, waiting for this decision. And her either husband or brother is in the Capitol, being close to the ultimate deciders. And she's like at the head of this and waiting, and all of a sudden the doors burst open and he runs out and he's screaming and he's saying, "It's lost, we're lost, it's all lost." Well, meanwhile, the middle-aged man is a vintner on the other side of the continent, where his wife's sitting inside. He's a retired vintner of generations. She's just sitting waiting for the president. He's outside, and what he sees, he's looking out towards San Francisco. The third person, the young pilot, is from another planet, and he's in a spacecraft that has been sent to monitor Earth, because they have been monitoring what's been going on developmentally. They not being of greater minds than Earth, but they being humans, and it explains how their planet was not seen by ours, but close enough for them to send. They've always been non-intervention like Star Trek, but there have been a couple of times, 3 times in Earth's history, where at least 2 that they have, come close. And it just so happens that at the same instant that in Washington, D.C., there's a nuclear, and on the West Coast, the vintner sees the plume over San Francisco that's coming towards him, that the younger has system failure in his cockpit, and there's a certain rules he has to follow. He gets one last message text home, and then he has to go into shutdown because there's a program he has to follow now. At a certain point, he has to give himself a lethal injection, which will put him out unconscious for a certain length of time. But these controls are set for his craft to land gently on the Earth.
Wow, it really, and it's a very exciting story.
And the fourth person is, well,
I think you shouldn't tell anymore, though.
So that's Genesis 3 and
Yeah.
how they form a family.
I would like everybody to be able to read it, and I think stopping at that point will whet everybody's appetite.
I can read a paragraph.
Okay, read a short paragraph for us. I do want the audience to know that all 3 books are on Tosca Lenci's website, and you can read them in...
It's on LP. I formed
LP.
this little one-woman publishing company.
Yes.
In order to, put the stuff up there. So.
We're going to put the website
I noticed you
on the
did.
credits.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it will be easy for people to go right to the website.
What a great opportunity. I know I said it then, and I thought it in between, for a writer to have a chance after all those silent, quiet, private years of collecting thoughts, you know, and writing them, to be able to talk about, you know, kind of boil it down. That's what WriterSpeak allowed me to do with.
Yeah.
It's
it
marvelous.
does.
It's a wonderful,
And
wonderful
then,
thing.
you know, because we're just having little synopsis,
Right.
then it directs people there, and because they're going to want to go and read what's going to happen. I was not going to let you tell the ending.
Well, okay, let's see. This is Grandpa JC. And that's what they have titles. There's Grandpa JC, Grandma JC, JC the Younger, and Little JC. Grandpa, entering the bedroom, heard sounds of the woman at her bath. He, too, found the moonlight pleasing. He went to stand at the window, taking care not to strike his shin on the chair nearby, as he had more times already than seemed reasonable. The hayfield to the west, softened by the moon's light, was tawny as a young cub's pelt, but he saw it, as soon it would be, thickened to the scythe. He rested his hands back against the chair, feet crossed, and allowed himself a rare savor of pride. They had made every season a full life unto itself, and every day as well. How had the woman put it? Their life was to be an interrupted but continuing dream to which they would return with each morning's awakening.
You have a lovely way of writing and describing. That gives us a flavor of your writing.
I've been very lucky to be able to develop it. You know, my father, I think I inherited that. And I do believe in evolution and our, you know, inheriting traits. I think I inherited that from him. He had that art, okay? His mechanics were, he was a butcher, and this was a trade. He was an immigrant, a family trade. So he was not able to write, you know, to have that time to write that I've had.
And now you do.
And he left very little, but he was the one to instill, you know, or that I could think of as when I began to be interested in literary things, I remembered that that's what he did when he had time. So I guess I inherited that.
Well, that's,
plus, you know,
nice thought.
other wonderful qualities from my mother.
Yeah. Well, thank you for us on WriterSpeak, Tosca. It
Thank
was
you,
certainly a
Jeane.
pleasure.
It was wonderful. Thank you.
The show here was produced at the C Media Labs. I also wish to thank our sponsor, the Sonoma County Gazette. And please join us next time for another episode of WriterSpeak, where you can meet another local author.